Inspiring interviews with today's top landlords. This is the Rental Income Podcast. And now, Dan Lane.
David, what do you think the greatest part of owning rental properties is?
Being able to have incremental increases in rent, which add up to a lot over time.
Can you give me an example of how you've been able to raise rent and it's really made a big difference for you?
Sure. We had our first purchase of a 12-unit building where all the apartments were going for $1,000 a month. We raised them each year, and now they're producing $2,500 a month across the board, and that really adds up.
That's a huge difference. That's a building that was producing $12,000 a month in rental income, and after a number of years and after a number of rent increases, it's now producing $30,000 a month in rental income. Rental properties really are the ultimate get-rich-slow plan. And on the show today, we're going to talk about how David has built a lot of wealth by just making sure he raises rent just a little bit every single year. On the podcast today, we're going to talk about how he does it, how he figures out how much he's going to increase rent. We'll talk about how he talks to his tenants about it, and how he avoids turnover. Turnover doesn't seem to be a big issue for David. It's something that I think about a lot, that I'm always maybe a little bit cautious with raising rent because I don't want to lose a tenant, because if a tenant leaves, it's going to cost me money to turn over the property. I'm probably going to have some vacancy. And I wouldn't say I'm afraid, but a lot of times I'm cautious about raising rent. But I might be leaving a lot of money on the table by thinking that way. So on the show today, we're going to talk about how David is doing this and how he has increased his rental income by just raising rent every year. Joining us on the show today from Boston is David Maher. We'll take a break to thank our sponsors. We'll come right back and we'll talk to David. I've had tenants that have either broken their leases or stopped paying rent, and I'm sure you know that this can be very expensive. It's very easy for the cost to exceed the amount of money that you're holding for a security deposit. And because of this risk, I started using the Guarantors to guarantee my leases. The Guarantors protects your rental income against rent defaults, vacancy loss, lease breaks, holdovers, and more. And this is all at no cost to you. Your tenants pay for the insurance premium. If you want to learn more about their platform, check out my bonus episode from September 15th, 2022. It's titled, "Is This Better Than a Security Deposit?" If you're ready to sign up, you can enroll within minutes by visiting theguarantors.com. Again, that's theguarantors.com. It's a lot of work to find a really good rental property, and when you actually find that property, you want to make sure you're working with a lender that can get that loan closed. The lender that I recommend is Chaley Ridge from Ridge Lending Group. She's a nationwide lender, and her specialty is helping investors finance rental properties. She has a ton of loan programs, and she can find something customized to you for your situation. If you want to find out more or you're ready to get started today, just go to ridgelendinggroup.com. That's RIDGE lendinggroup.com. NMLS 42056.
Rental Income Podcast.
David, let's start off talking about your portfolio. What does your portfolio look like?
So I have a joint portfolio with my brother, and we have about 220 residential units consisting of a lot of 2 families, 3 families, and 6 families, and then, of course, some buildings in the Boston area and kind of the greater Boston area.
What are the neighborhoods like?
The neighborhoods are probably top-notch. They're all located near public transportation in the Boston area and near some universities and hospitals and biotech firms as well. So a lot of condos that are also located near these properties, but youthful 25 to 35-year-old neighborhoods that, people probably an average income of $100,000 plus.
So these sound like they're A-class neighborhoods?
They are definitely A-class neighborhoods, I would consider, yeah.
And then for the inside, are you going with top-end finishes, granite countertops, stainless steel appliances?
We are. We've back in the day, we kind of were just getting it rented and doing the basic thing of coming in and doing the floors over, putting new windows in, and then painting the place. Now our focus has kind of shifted over the last 8 to 10 years, where we're putting the kind of condo quality finishes into apartments, and we're seeing those returns of the demand for people wanting to rent them.
And are you doing this full time?
Doing it full time.
Okay,
Yep.
awesome. And your brother is too?
He is. Yep. We're both in an office together.
How is that working out? Like that family dynamic where your family and you're investing together. Is everything going okay?
It's fantastic. My brother and I have a great relationship. We see eye to eye. We discuss certain properties, and if we want to make a purchase on one, we run the numbers. So it's kind of like clockwork now, which is nice.
That's great. Awesome. Now, I always hear on the show that, people say that you're going to get the highest return on like a C class property or maybe like a B minus type property where maybe the neighborhood isn't quite as nice. But obviously, you guys are doing really well with A class neighborhoods. Why do you think people think that you can't make money with an A class property?
Maybe because they think you need to spend a lot of money to make that money, which it depends on everyone's situation in their real estate portfolio, how long they've been doing it. But what we've learned is that the higher quality apartments, you tend to get the higher quality tenants who become less of a problem. That down the road they're focused on their careers, but they want a nice, comfortable place to live.
Mm-hmm.
And for us, it's turned into less maintenance, believe it or not, over the years. Some of these lower class apartments that we've had just constantly, being called to go over there and fix stuff up. And we realize that once you kind of upgrade plumbing and electrical, that things kind of run smoothly by themselves.
Yeah. So trying to get a maybe a little bit higher return for maybe a cheaper property that's maybe going to be a little bit more hassle. Like that's something that doesn't interest you at all.
Correct. Yeah. And there's a market for that, and I get it. And I get where people own property in different states and they don't really even drive by the property and everything. We're more focused on being able to get access to a property if we need to, and kind of more of a hands-on service.
Yeah.
Yeah. So.
And the other thing too, I think, if you're looking at a property, like say an A class property versus a C class property, your cash flow on the C class property is probably going to go up a little bit over time. But I think you're going to get way bigger increases with an A class property because your tenants are more affluent. They have more money. They're going to be able to pay those higher rents. That's just my impression. Is that true?
That is what we have seen. Yes. We have a lot of 25 to 35-year-olds who 3 roommates will live in an apartment together, but they'll pay $1,500 a bedroom for that. And
Wow.
they're able, it checks their box because they're able to, they don't have to pay 25 to 2,800 for maybe a 1 bed, but so they're able to save some money with their great incomes. But and less maintenance, and it's just more of a focus for that particular type of tenant, where they do want the higher end. And the increases in rent tend to keep going up a little bit faster than those C class ones.
Now, I want to figure out how you're pushing the rent, and I think that's made a huge impact on your bottom line. So when you're looking at raising rent every year, is there a certain dollar amount that you're pushing for, or do you just look at the market and see what you think you can get for a property?
Yeah, so the rule of thumb would be around 5 to 6%.
Okay.
The increase. And based on the rent, you can kind of do the numbers that way. Some of these places are trying to bring in potential rent control, which if they do that, that number is still around 5% increase. That's kind of the maximum, what you're allowed to charge. For us, it kind of depends on, we have some, so we have probably between 220 units, so you have a number of people that just move on every year. We're kind of
Right.
a stepping stone to home ownership, and we get that. So that allows us in some of these properties where if a rent is a certain level, that we can contact our realtors who show up and say, this is what your comps are in the area. You could probably be charging this. And if people who are naturally moving out, we can just raise the rents to that new market level. If a tenant is interested in staying, we tend to just raise them, that 5% charge, and they're pretty comfortable with that. And that allows us to, kind of keep a certain amount of tenants that we know want to stay a couple years, maybe longer than they planned.
All right. So you'll get 5% if a person is going to stay, but you'll get an even bigger increase if you're going to turn the property over.
Yes, and the nice thing is it's not even. You might have to go in and you don't have to do a complete renovation of the apartment, but a cleanup and everything like that will sometimes produce the 10 to 15% more
Wow.
return a year, which is really nice. Yeah, not in every case, but
Yeah.
but the important thing is, and I hope everyone out there who's listening, you do have to raise rents. I think a 5% is a good way to explain to tenants that this is, expenses are going up. We have to raise rents, and in some cases, you really should be bringing rents to market level now. But you want to be fair to tenants, and they're going through stuff as well. So it's kind of a give and take.
Yeah. I mean, I'm just kind of thinking through my head here. You get a 5% increase on your rent, like that's significantly adding to your cash flow. But then when you compound that over a 5-year period or a 10-year period, I mean, that really becomes a significant amount of money just getting those increases every year.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, if you have an apartment that's $1,000 for a one bedroom, raising it, $50 for 5%, then in 10 years you're at 1,500 now.
Right.
And so all of a sudden, and think about that, how compounding you could do that over all of your portfolio, and so.
Yeah, I mean, with 220 rentals like that, that's a lot of money. But even for someone that has one or two properties, I mean, that really is a significant difference in your cash flow.
There's no doubt about it, and you start to notice it, and don't be afraid if a tenant says they're going to leave, and you have your channels, have some good realtors that know the market, that come in, take a look. Maybe they can give us suggestions, and you never know. Sometimes it's a blessing when somebody leaves, because you can bring stuff back up to market rent. And I get it. We have relationships with tenants that over the years, and so the key is to be fair, and you want to cater to them, but you also have to it's kind of, you want to get as close to market rent as you can.
Right. So when someone first moves in, do you tell them, hey, the rent is probably going to increase in year number 2, or do you have that conversation as the lease is coming up?
Yeah, so I've seen landlords in the past kind of put it into the lease itself, saying we are going to raise this 5% a year just based on expenses and market stuff. We kind of do it as the lease is coming to expire. We kind of say, what are your plans for housing next year? Are you thinking of staying or going? And everybody's different by case. And at that point, if they decide to stay, say, well, we do have to raise the rent by about $100 a month or whatever it is. And that tends to, people seem to be satisfied with that route.
Mm-hmm. I like that. So that's more of a conversation that you're having with them versus them just getting a letter in the mail saying, hey, your rent is going up by $100.
Yeah, it's less robotic, and it's kind of giving them the option, because again, usually the question is, oh, how much is the rent going to go up? And so we kind of give them their based on our numbers and running it. But yeah, it's a case by case, and I think it's important to have that conversation with tenants, because it's just less abrasive, but it gives you the option still to say, hey, this is what we're thinking. So, and you put the ball back in their court.
And when do you have that conversation? Is there certain days before the lease expires that you have that conversation?
Yeah, it's usually about 90 days. We kind of put that into the lease. Kind of say, tenants should notify us 90 days if they want to stay or go. They rarely do because life happens. We get it.
Yeah.
But we have a system where, each month we'll have different leases expiring in different months. So my brother and I will go down and kind of go through the list and say, okay, this is how long this person's been here. This is what they've been paying. Let's find out if they want to stay or go, and then kind of adjust our numbers accordingly.
Now, one thing that I always look at when I'm renewing a lease is I always want to keep that tenant, because when I look at my expenses, the turnover costs are always it's really my biggest expense. When you look at you're probably going to have some vacancy, you might have to do some touch up paint, some cleaning. So I always tend to not push the rent if I have a good tenant that's paying on time. Do you think I'm maybe leaving a lot of money on the table by not going for those rent increases every year?
I do think so. If your place is in pretty good shape, you are going to have to get like a cleaning service there during turnovers. And maybe, it's funny, we kind of use the same paint color everywhere. And then we have a whole network of, cleaners and painters that we can kind of send in, and we kind of know the cost going in. And for us, incurring, $150 cleaning charge and maybe, not a whole paint job in our apartment, but depending on the situation, for us to spend $1,000, if you're not doing any major renovations or anything like that, that to us it's well worth it, because you're kind of freshening up the place. Someone now moves in, and say you were getting $1,000, now you can probably get $1,200 for it. And you kind of go from there, and now they stay, and then you start increasing them slowly based on expenses and stuff. And I get good tenants. We've had tenants who are 15 to 20 years, but I'd say my biggest advice would be to get a decent realtor. And then Boston has a very strong rental market for brokers and realtors, and they kind of know the market very well, and they're hungry because in Massachusetts the tenant pays the broker fee to the broker.
Oh, so it's not costing you anything
No,
to do that. Okay.
in fact, yeah, and so it's their, they obviously call us even 6 months ahead of time before leases end and say, do you have any idea what's happening? So they want their inventory, and when we're kind of in question and we say, oh, I don't know, what do you think this apartment we could get for this? And we bring them in, and then they give us the comps, and oftentimes the number is a little higher than we even expected.
Right. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And so, all right, so for the way that your management is set up, your realtor is leasing the property, doing the marketing for it, doing the showings. And then when they find someone that's qualified and able to or wants to rent the property, is that when you and your brother would step in to get the lease signed?
Yeah, so they send over the paperwork, and we look at the application, we look at the credit check, and then we kind of give the approval or not approval. Most of the times, it's good to go. I like using the realtor, and maybe every state is different in America, but I like using the realtor because it kind of takes you out of it, and it's more business when people go through a realtor, and it also people feel comfortable going through a realtor because it kind of holds them accountable. Because say on move-in day, the place is just a disaster, and they say, "What's going on here? I paid you rent." So it kind of forces us that we can concentrate on getting the apartment turned over, getting it ready, satisfactory. And a lot of times when people come in, they it's better than they looked because they kind of looked at an apartment that was maybe a little messy and stuff like that. But it kind of allows us to focus on what we need to do, and then more the business side, the realtor takes care of.
Yeah.
And so it brings a third person in, and people actually are pretty comfortable with that.
Yeah, I mean that's a great way to do it, and especially with the tenants paying for the realtor. I mean that there's no reason not to do that. So let's take a look at one of your deals, and maybe we could look at your very first deal. What was that What kind of property got you started?
Sure. It was a three family, and the purchase price was 300,000. Worked all summer, fixed that up, rented it, and the rents I actually lived on the first floor. Had a couple of roommates, so I got the first floor was I was collecting $1,500. On the second floor, I was collecting $1,500, which was a two-bedroom, and on the top floor was a three-bedroom. I was collecting $2,400, and my mortgage was about $1,250 a month.
Wow. Okay. And so you were living in one of the bedrooms in your unit and then renting out the other two bedrooms?
Yeah, so exactly. So for me, I didn't want to live at home. I said I'm going to live in one of the bedrooms, and I'm going to rent out two of the bedrooms. And I think they were like um, grad students who went to Harvard University,
Mhm.
which is down the road. So yeah, so that was my route.
Wow. I mean, so that property was very profitable right from the start.
It was, yeah, it was. You could get not a lot of people. I feel like but there was a lot of course, landlords, but um, to have like the suggestion of my father to live in one of the bedrooms, rent out the other two, and then rent the other. Yeah, there was just a demand there, and I don't know if it started turning, the late '90s into 2000, but that was certainly a home run, and it was able to kind of springboard me and kind of teamed up with my brother. We had some other assets that my father had as well. He was with us as well. So kind of an interesting journey.
All right. So you're living in that property and you've got $5,400 a month in rent. And how much was your mortgage payment?
Sure, it was 1250.
1250. Okay. So you've got profit of like 4,000 a month on that property. So what were you doing with that money?
Saving it for more properties to buy that I would kind of go in jointly with my brother and
Yeah.
my father who was around at the time.
Yeah. I mean, what a great start. I mean, that's awesome. Now, yeah, I'm sure you've been raising the rents on that, like we've been talking about here. How much are you getting rent? What's the total rent for that building today?
So in hindsight, to the building, the three family did go over a kind of a major renovation rather recently. It was kind of you're talking, plumbing and electrical that the house was probably built in 1950,
Mhm.
and so it was time to kind of renovate. So I did renovate it, and I did spend some money to redo that house. But the current rents now is 4,500 a floor,
Wow.
so around a little over 13,000
Wow. So I mean that building went from making 5,400 a month to 13,000 a month.
in about 24 years.
Wow.
Yes. Mhm.
Incredible. Now, what about appreciation? I know there's been a lot of appreciation in the last 24 years. How much has that property appreciated?
So it went from about 300,000. Now it's worth about 1.8.
Wow.
Yeah, and
Wow.
and the reason it's had high is that the rents are supporting that, the rent
Right.
amount, and so someone who was interested wanted to buy that, they'd say, okay, what's the rent roll been?
Yeah.
And yeah, that does support it. Wow.
Wow. And how much did you spend on the rehab?
About 500,000.
Okay. Okay. So all right. So you're all in 500,000 for the rehab, 300,000 for the purchase. So about 800,000 and it's worth 1.8. So this property is appreciated $1 million.
Yeah, and then they're still spitting out,
Yeah, right.
which is
13,000
awesome.
a month.
Yeah,
Incredible.
yeah, it's um, yeah, it's been a good formula. So.
Yeah. Yeah. So do you see any end game in this? I feel like you've got such a great system going on. Like, do you see yourself buying more properties or are you happy with your portfolio right now?
At the current moment, we're certainly happy where we are. We still have a number of properties that, again, now they're looking like since we've actually like done any type of upgrade, you're talking 15, 20 years. So Again, fully rented, people will take that. Those rents tend to be a little lower if we want to go in. And sometimes we don't have to renovate the entire house and spend 500,000. Sometimes we may just be putting in, central air and heat, and then, putting in additional bathroom or something, and you might spend 80,000.
Mm-hmm.
And that can transform a property. So for us, I think we're comfortable now keeping where we are and redoing some of our older houses that we own. And we'll see down the road if we want to expand a little bit more.
It really is mind-boggling how much money you can make with rental properties. I mean, to think that every single month for the last 24 years, this property has produced cash flow, and now it's appreciated $1 million. I mean, that is really incredible. It really makes me want to go out there and buy more rentals. If you're on the fence about buying your next property, hopefully this inspired you. And if anybody wants to reach out to David, I've got his contact information on the website. You can find it at rentalincomepodcast.com/episode 457. I'd also like to thank our longtime sponsor, Chaley Ridge, for sponsoring today's episode. If you're looking to buy a rental property, whether you're just getting started or you want to add to your portfolio, reach out to Chaley. She's a nationwide lender, and I know she'll take great care of you. You can find out more at ridgelendinggroup.com. That's RIDGE, lendinggroup.com, NMLS 42056. Thank you so much for checking out the podcast today. Make sure you follow the show. I put out a new interview every single Tuesday, and if you're following the show, you'll get notified every time an episode comes out. My name is Dan Lane, and this has been the Rental Income Podcast.